So first up, as promised, we're going to talk about Westerns. I've always enjoyed, not always, growing up, when grandparents would have Westerns on TV, as a child, you think, oh, it's so boring. But when I was in high school and started taking film classes and whatnot and really discovered the power of a good Western, it was just, wow, mind-blowing. And, that was the 90s when you had Tombstone coming out as well, and a bit of a revival. Tombstone, Unforgiven, those kind of movies are hitting the scene, and just really great stuff. So I had appreciation for Westerns. I love the classic, good old John Wayne Western you just can't beat. Rio Bravo is my favorite ever. If I had to pick one, it'd be Rio Bravo, classic Western-wise. Tombstone's pretty darn good, though. But when I started studying archetypes, Westerns rose up in prominence again because we're not going to talk about the frontiersman archetype today. We're talking about the trickster archetype this month. Frontiersman will be next. There's a reason why you have to study have to understand the trickster sub-archetype first before you can move into the frontiersman, because they do kind of come in order. The trickster archetype blurs boundaries. We'll talk about that today. And so boundaries are expanded, or we don't really know where boundaries are. Think about this literally in terms of a country's boundaries. So think about it in terms of the United States, going from colonial and early American times, revolutionary times, to expanding westward. Well, that creates a frontier. Okay, we've gained, or we've purchased, or we've stolen, or whatever, this land and this territory, and now we need to settle it. And there are a lot of dangers in there. It's an unsure territory. And the frontiersman is important because frontiersman goes into that unsure territory and makes it safe for people. It's not really a judgment call. The frontiersman's not there arguing we need to keep pushing that boundary. The frontiersman's just there existing in that space. So, at first, in terms of American history, with heroes and literary characters and whatnot, you had characters, historic characters, obviously, as well, like Daniel Boone, Davy Crockett, but they become mythologized. So the Hawkeye and the Leatherstocking Tales, Last of the Mohicans, and so forth. So that literal frontiersman on the American frontier there. But then as the frontier continued to push west, it was only a matter of time before we reached the Wild West territories. Again, it's unsafe. This area is unsafe because and we'll talk about more in detail next episode, but it's unsafe because law and order hasn't quite fully reached and established itself there. And in terms of a hero, in terms of the frontiersman hero archetype, you need somebody that'll be there to make things safe. And this usually shows up in Westerns as the sheriff or the town marshal or something like that. We see it beyond even the West in things like space travel or technology like cyberpunk and whatnot. So the frontiersman's always with us, even if our physical boundaries have expanded as far as they can. One thing I talk a lot about on my YouTube channel, and I've already established it as a common topic on this podcast as well, is the way that a lot of ideologues are trying to infiltrate our popular culture, our art, our films, books, television, and so forth, to try to achieve a change that they want to see in society. And there's you might think, well, doesn't any artist do that? Doesn't any artist put their beliefs and their values and their philosophy into their work? Depends on how you mean. Any artist being true to themselves as an artist, whether you're a writer, a filmmaker, whatever, if you're doing it correctly, if you're really trying to make good art and being true to yourself, then yeah, your philosophies and whatnot are going to make it into that art. That's just the natural process, but it's an organic process, and it should be an organic process. What we're seeing today is people who aren't necessarily, a lot of times they're not even writers, they're not filmmakers, that's not what they're really trained or good at doing. But even if you have those who are trained and have given us great work in the past, their new mode of operation now is to treat themselves as propagandists first. The first goal for them when they sit down and write a script or shoot a film or whatever is to push an agenda, preach a message. They want this film to accomplish X in society. And that's not the way to make good art. The way to make good art is to sit down and to try to create good art. That should be your first motive. That should be your first. Of course, if you're doing that correctly, a lot of your personal beliefs and values and things that you would like to see in the world reflected are going to make it into that art. That's always been the case, but it is a big difference in which one of those two goals you put first. And that's the difference between what I would call art and propaganda. And we have in Hollywood today a lot of ideologues. This will come back to Westerns in a second, I promise. But we have in Hollywood today a lot of ideologues, and the definition of an ideologue is someone who's been, just the dime store definition here, is someone who's been completely taken over by an idea. This idea is their central primary programming now. Everything they do has to be in service of this idea now, of this agenda. People can they can take religions to the extreme point, unhealthy extreme obsessive point where it becomes an ideology. And that's not to say that any religion is an ideology, because no, of course not. You can believe in a certain worldview. You can believe in a supreme creator being with a supreme code of justice and morals that you are to follow. But most religions will also include the concept of free will in there, and the concept of we are here on earth. We can't, we need to be concerned with earthly things. We need to eat. We need to have shelter. We need to, and so forth. So an ideologue, though, is completely consumed by this agenda, this ideology. They let it seep through them. They let it influence every single thing they do. So let's say you've got a great filmmaker, an incredibly talented filmmaker, who's been taken over by an ideology. Well, it doesn't matter how amazing they were back in the past. It doesn't matter what amazing work they've given us. From the moment that they were taken over by that ideology until, probably forever, because it's very rare people break from ideologies, but it can be done. From that point on, their work is going to be serving the ideology and not creating good art. So we're seeing that today a lot with the wokeism, the woke movements. It's not that a good piece of art can't also portray or get across a message that some might deem as super liberal or super woke, but that's not what we're seeing today. We're seeing agendas, and it's just not even a matter of argument. I mean, we've had leaked emails from Disney, Sony, other companies, where you've got the actual filmmakers, the actual people who work there, trying to say, look, yeah, we really need to change the world. We need to start pushing a lot of this stuff into our content, and we need to get this and this. We need to make sure kids are growing up with this kind of thing. And again, people try to defend that and say, well, isn't that anybody? Wouldn't anybody want good moral lessons to teach their kids? It's all in the difference. It's all in the which comes first. Are you trying to make a good, quality story that would be good for kids, that would teach them things? Or are you trying to preach a message? And how do we do that? We'll contextualize it in a story, So this is the fall of Hollywood. This is the fall of all of our great franchises, all of the movies and television series, streaming series and whatnot. This is why Disney Star Wars is absolutely unwatchable. This is the fall of the Marvel Cinematic Universe. And you can date that back. Again, it's not even a point of discussion. I mean, you can see the moment. It was with the Captain Marvel movie. There was a hard pivot. Suddenly, Kevin Feige or whoever was ultimately in charge or whatever was no longer interested in creating engaging stories that drew people in. Then it was about, we've got to preach these messages. We've got to present women in a certain way. We've got to make sure we're representing all of these various minorities and victimhoods and so forth. And what's happened to the Marvel Cinematic Universe, does anybody even really care anymore, And it was just a hard pivot. It was a distinct place that it turned there. So that's what we're seeing in Hollywood. As I was really picking up on a lot of Westerns, rewatching some Westerns, classic Westerns from back in the day that I hadn't watched in a while, and going back and actually watching some of these Westerns that, are classics that I just, for whatever reason, never got around to, I've been enjoying it a lot. And I eventually ended up watching High Noon. High Noon was a film in the 50s. And I'd heard about it. I really like John Wayne movies, and I really respect John Wayne too. John Wayne is a person, is a human being. Just really have a lot of respect for him. And I had heard back in the day that he didn't like High Noon. So I think that's probably one of the reasons why I never quite got around to watching it. But I wanted to give it a chance. I didn't quite understand all of the things the arguments that had been made about it, because, I wasn't alive during that time. And, I was going in it blindly enough to really kind of give it a good chance. And I watched it, and I'll talk about my thoughts on it in a second. But then I looked into all of the controversy as well. And we won't spend a whole time unpacking every little thing here, but long story short, it was during the McCarthy era. It was during the time where filmmakers were being blacklisted. You know, there were absolutely communist people with communist agendas working in the entertainment industry, and McCarthy was trying to weed them out. And we had the congressional hearings and so forth. And a lot of the individuals that worked behind the scenes on High Noon were communists. That's just a known fact now. So the idea, and John Wayne called the movie a communist parable, or a parable, a way to comment against the blacklisting and everything that was going on. Now, I just kind of want to lay that out. You always have to be careful when you talk about McCarthyism and stuff today, because people want to treat it as a binary subject one way or the other. And it's so ridiculous. It's so hard to have conversations with people about it today, because, you know, the mainstream media is like, oh, it was terrible. Oh, it was a witch hunt. It was the most horrible, un-American thing that's ever happened. Oh, McCarthy's a crook. He's an evil, this and that. And then you got people who don't like the whole communist agenda thing, like myself, but people who want to try to deify or make McCarthy some sort of saint. You know, I've talked about it before on my channel, and I get comments like, this is your daily reminder that McCarthy did nothing wrong, you know. And you're going to say that about any human being, then there's a problem in your thinking. You're way too given to your own ideology there. The fact is that there were communists at work in the entertainment industry, and they were at work to try to disillusion the American dream, disillusion the American goals and ideals, because then they could, you know, maybe hopefully push communism in as a replacement. And, you know, you look at the long game, and we've certainly seen they've made a lot of progress on that front throughout the decades. But, you know, whether you want to sit here and talk about, oh, so McCarthy was perfectly justified in everything they did, and the blacklist, and let's get you to name names and all this kind of stuff, that's a conversation for a different stream. I'm not even schooled enough on exactly what went down and the how-tos and everything like that. So I'm not going to sit here and tell you McCarthy was some sort of saint, but I'm also not going to tell you that the Red Scare or whatever was just a trumped up, you know, ridiculous notion. No, it was there. We had communists working in Hollywood in the entertainment industry. And again, that's fine. I mean, you've got people of all different philosophies and whatnot working in any industry at a given time. It's America. You're free to hold those philosophies. But when you're trying to use something, especially something as dangerous and dangerously possibly effective as story, as film in particular, and in the American society, especially at the time, when you're trying to use that as a vehicle to deconstruct, let's deconstruct the American ideals. Let's do that. Let's tear it all down, and let's try and put something in place of it. That's what was going on, and that's what John Wayne said about High Noon. Now, you can look up YouTube searches for High Noon, and you'll see people trying to defend it. You'll see some people talking about it, accusing it and so forth. I'm going to, again, not to get into the conversation of, was it a parable about communist, you know, was it a anti-Red Scare parable? Was it all these kinds of things? I'm not really going to go into that discussion. My problems with High Noon is that it is, and this is just, you can't argue this, and I'll give you the details. I'll tell you exactly how it is. It is a 100% deconstruction of the American monomyth. Absolutely. It is a deconstruction of certain American ideals. Now, whether you can argue that that was due to a communist agenda or not, or whatever, that's a different discussion. You can have that, you know, debate or whatever elsewhere. But it's my least favorite Western. And I don't say that lightly, because it is a masterfully made film. It is a beautifully made film aesthetically. The cinematography is amazing. The direction, the acting, the way the script is constructed, it takes place in real time. We're waiting for High Noon when this outlaw is supposed to arrive on the train, and his case has been thrown out. He's been released from prison, and he's coming back to get revenge on the town marshal that sent him up the creek to begin with. And that's Gary Cooper's character. You've got an amazing cast in this movie. Gary Cooper, Grace Kelly, Lon Chaney Jr. is even in the movie, a wonderful role. You've got a lot of really well-written characters. who was Lloyd Bridges, I think, is in the movie as well. So really great artistically done film. So that's why I can't really say, oh, it was just propaganda or it was this or that. But I can tell you that the story, the content of the story is a deconstruction. It's a deconstruction of American ideals. Now, a deconstruction in general isn't a bad thing. Sometimes you can deconstruct something with a story as just simply a way to think about it in a different manner. Or let's consider it this way. Or, we've gotten so many people just kind of thinking about it one way. Let's try and turn it on its head a little bit and think about it this way. But it depends on what you're deconstructing to really, is it moral to deconstruct that or not? So my problems with High Noon are 100% moral, really. I think that the American monomyth is a good thing. And every story doesn't have to be, and if you are unclear what I mean when I say the American monomyth, scroll back a few episodes. We did a whole episode, and I've talked about it on my YouTube channel a lot as well. What specifically is the American monomyth? You've got the hero's journey, which is, the hero going through these challenges and developing through them and so forth, with a mentor, special weapon, crossing a threshold and so forth. The American and the hero's journey is also called the monomyth. The American monomyth has some very unique aspects. It is very much like a Christ-like story. It's a Christ figure, in terms of literary terms. Someone who's self-sacrificing, someone who is there to serve others, someone who wants the good of the society, wants the good of people around him, and so forth, and is very into will deny himself or herself to give that. Why would you deconstruct that? Or if you wanted to deconstruct that in a way that maybe presents a different type of character or a different type of, you could do it in different ways, but High Noon seeks to deconstruct the American monomyth, and it replaces it with nothing. Nothing. So I'm going to totally spoil the plot for you here if you haven't seen it. In general, I'm not going to go into super in-depth, but you have this town marshal who's served as a marshal for so many years. He's really whipped this western town into shape. It's safe now for people to bring their children out on the streets. It used to be one of these rowdy Wild West towns back in the day, and he's really whipped it into shape. Now he's met a woman that he's going to marry, and she's a Quaker. And of course, Quakers don't believe in any kind of violence or anything like that, so he's agreed to quit his job as a marshal. They're getting married, and they're going to go off on their honeymoon, and he's going to go be a storekeeper with her somewhere in another town. And the next marshal who's going to replace him arrives the next day, so no big deal. But after they're married, as they're getting into the wagon and they're getting ready to go off on their honeymoon or whatever, they receive news that this outlaw, who this marshal, Gary Cooper's character, had put away, his case was dismissed or whatever it was. He's coming back to get his revenge, and he's going to arrive on the train at high noon. He's got some of his cronies, I think 3, who are there and arrived in town before him, and they're waiting at the train station for their leader, and they're going to go, and they're coming after the marshal. Okay, great setup, right? Great setup. I mean, you've got unity of place. We're in the town. You've got unity of time. It's at high noon. I mean, some really great storytelling tropes here. And you would think, okay, well, first off, this marshal says, I can't leave this town. I can't leave. They would just chase after me. I've got to stay here, do my duty, because I'm still marshal until the next day when the next guy gets here. And I have to face this man. I have to stay here. That's the beginning of a really great aspirational, heroic monomyth attitude to take, right? Don't shirk your duty. Don't run away. And he goes around and asks for people, tries to form a posse, to deputize, a lot of men. His deputy doesn't want to help him because his deputy's huffy that he didn't get called on to replace the marshal. So he tries to deputize some other men. Those that do say they'll join him are either too old or drunks, or back out at the last minute when they realize that nobody else is really joining. So it really comes down to it's just this marshal, just this one lone marshal against these 4 gunmen who are coming, to kill him. The town, left and right, it's just like as we get closer to high noon, the town is coming up with they're just these awful examples of humanity, one after the other. People that you thought would be loyal to him or whatever are just, deciding, no, we're too scared. We're going to cover our own butt. they've decided now some of them are even angry at him for staying. They're like, look, if you would leave, he would just follow you and he wouldn't stay here. Why are you going to stay here and have him come here and shoot up our town? Why don't you just leave? And the marshal himself has doubts at one point and thinks he might want to stay, or want to leave rather. Of course, his new wife of just, a couple hours is on the verge of leaving him for wanting to stay and take care of this and do this and whatnot. But we don't even have a good central philosophy in our main marshal, because the film doesn't answer the question. Well, yeah, by staying, aren't you kind of putting the town at risk? Because the marshal says at the beginning that if he left, they would just follow him. Well, yeah, okay, if you want to face the guy, wouldn't you at least leave the town and face the guy so that he wouldn't stay there and shoot up the town? Basic Superman 101, right? Don't get the battle away from the middle of the city where people could be hurt. And the movie never answers that. The movie never really gives you a clear reason as to the marshal's thinking. And it does that on purpose so that maybe it's a little bit of pride in there. Maybe it's a little bit of, but this is my duty. There's sort of that blind allegiance to it's my duty. I can't leave because it's my duty and I have to do this. Well, yeah, but what if your duty is going to get people in trouble or get people in danger and hurt them, So it's left in question. The film purposefully doesn't answer the question, should he stay or should he go? The film very careful not to answer that question for you. And you've got all these people in town just showing no spine and no backbone, abandoning him on every front. We do get a pretty good gunfight when the outlaw arrives, and town marshal holds his own to a certain degree, but it becomes evident that he takes out one or two of them, but he's going down at this point. And who ends up stepping in and helping him but his wife? The Quaker woman, who doesn't believe in any violence, ends up shooting one and killing them. And then the marshal's able to kill the last guy. Then the town rallies around him. They're like, oh, this is great. And he looks at these people who have just been spineless cowards and have abandoned him in every way. And he just looks at them, disgusted look on his face, and he takes his marshal star off and throws it in the dirt, and then just gets in the carriage and they drive off. How is that a fun story on any level? It's a great setup, really great setup. It's rife with opportunities to give commentary on this or that. That's a terrible story, the way that's executed. And what I mean terrible is in the message that it gives. It's a message of nihilism. It's a message of, hey, once there was this town of these spineless cowards who couldn't be loyal to anybody they believed in, and there was this leader who wasn't maybe even taking their best interests at heart. Maybe he was. We don't really know. But these villains eventually came for him, so his wife had to throw away everything she believed in, and she ends up shooting one of them dead. And then he is able to overcome, and then he just leaves the town in disgust. I'm like, how can anybody watch this movie and just not have a bad taste in your mouth? And I think it's an example of how a lot of people who are trying to defend this movie and think, oh, it's so great, the themes and all this kind of stuff. They're letting the masterful use of storytelling tools to blind them to the fact that the substance of that story is poison. And I don't say that lightly. It's poison. Let's use all of these let's masterfully tell this tale so that we can present nihilism before you. Now, I've heard people try to say, no, but see, it makes me think about this and this and that. Okay, well, you did those mental connections in your head. The film didn't. So you can watch that and you can try and say, but the reason why I kind of think of it like this or that, fine, but that's not what the film did. You have to do that work on your own. It's just an objectively bad message to send. It very much is a deconstruction. I'm 100% with John Wayne in that, of American ideals, of the American monomyth. I utterly loathe this film far more than I would a poorly made film. And you might say, how can you? Because High Noons is very masterfully made, sure. But the message it's trying to get across. There's a genre of Western that comes later called the revisionist genre, revisionist Westerns. I hate that title, and I hate a lot of those movies because they're trying to, deconstruct or revise the idea of the more aspirational or, just heroic good man, the sheriff or the marshal or whoever it is, Um, and I think a lot of good movies are labeled under revisionist Western, and they're not exactly trying to deconstruct. They're just telling a different story, like Once Upon a Time in the West, for example. It's not a deconstruction. It's just telling a different kind of story with some different. In fact, it's a story of redemption. It's a beautiful movie. But the this movie was before the revisionist Western was even a genre in the 50s and was 100% trying to cut off the American ideals at the knees. It's mind-boggling how people can defend this movie on that premise. You want to talk about how masterfully it's made? Sure. You want to use it as examples of cinematography, and stuff in textbooks? Great. Hey, it was beautifully shot. But just an awful, awful story, awful film. And it made me think of the wretched deconstructions that we're receiving today. One of the things I really got going with my channel on back in the day was talking about how Man of Steel was a conscious, purposeful, bad faith deconstruction of everything great about Superman. Let's take away his aspirational nature. Yeah, but what if this happened? But what if? Just trying their best to dirty him up, muddy him up, and make him a character that really can't really inspire you much at all. And that is done, of course, to, we talked about it when we talked about the aspirational versus cathartic motivational heroes. That's done to try to bring down the standard, so that we can reduce the standard of how good we should be in society, so we don't have to try as hard. That's the idea. And that's an old example by now, that's over 10 years old. But we're still seeing those kinds of deconstructions left and right. And the deconstructions are starting to go more and more hand in hand with the woke ideologies that are taking over and supplanting good storytelling. So what do we do? Well, there is a lesson in the past that I think we can apply to the future, and it's been applied, in some cases. John Wayne hated High Noon, and Howard Hawks, a classic, wonderful movie director who directed Rio Bravo. Howard Hawks was an amazing director. He was one of those versatile directors. He directed everything from musicals to westerns to horror, screwball comedies. I mean, he's just a really versatile director. But he and John Wayne came up with this film, Rio Bravo, as an answer to High Noon, as a way to say, no, that's not how it would go down. Let's present a really good American monomyth, a good aspirational story. And what do you have in Rio Bravo? You have the town marshal, John Wayne, who has got this villain in custody. He shot somebody. He's going to be picked up by, or he's a sheriff, I think, and the marshal's coming to pick him up or something like that. I don't remember the details or the names and labels just right. But he's got to hold him in the prison there, in the town prison, the town jail, until the marshals can come pick him up. And the problem, though, is that this crook, this murderer, is the brother of a very wealthy, corrupt, landowner. And the landowners hired all of these thugs and everybody, and they're coming to town to spring him, to get him free. And the sheriff could very easily say, I'm not risking my life. Hey, here, take him, whatever. It's not worth that much or whatever. But no, the sheriff, he has not a lot of people to help him. He has his old deputy, Dean Martin's character, which shows up, who'd been a drunk, who's trying to kind of dry himself out. Was amazing back in the day, but he's got a shaky hand, and we're wondering how much good he's going to be. You've got a young ranch hand, Ricky Nelson plays, who's really good with a gun, and he's going to help. And you've got Stumpy, the old jail keeper, who's got a limp, so not great odds against all of these, bounty hunters and gangs or whatever that the villain is hired to come in there and take it. And it's a wonderful story. It's a wonderful, inspiring story about people who are going to stand on their ideals and really inspire the town around them. The town around them starts to help, and stuff. And just a great movie, a wonderful movie. So it's a wonderful example. It's my favorite Western ever for a lot of different reasons, not just that, but also because of Howard Hawks' masterful filmmaking himself. Amazing cast, amazing acting, direction, beautifully shot, and so forth. So I'd recommend going see Rio Bravo if you haven't. It really is like the quintessential classic Western. I mean, I know people would say, oh, yeah, I think this John Ford movie is, or something like that. And yeah, I mean, there are a lot of movies we could say they are the quintessential classic Westerns. But I think a lot of people would agree with me that Rio Bravo is just, if you're interested at all in classic Westerns, you got to watch Rio Bravo. Really classic film. that happened, and I think we need more of that today. We need more movies today coming in and saying, I'm tired of these deconstructions. I'm tired of these ideologies ruining these franchises. Now, we can't go in and just fix the franchise, right? That doesn't work. Anytime people say, well, maybe the next Star Wars movie will be better, or maybe, if they could have done another Man of Steel movie, it would have fixed things and you'd have understood what he was going for in the end. No, they can't do another movie in the same continuity, because even if that movie suddenly started treats the characters correctly, all it is a justification and a validation of all the deconstruction that they already did. So it needs to be new movies that come out. And we have had this to some degree. I need to watch the movie a lot more carefully before I can 100% give it, my recommendation. But there's a film called Appaloosa, which was in the last decade with Viggo Mortensen, was in it. Forgetting the other members of the cast. But this was a Western in the last 10 years that tried to undo the revisionist Western. Some people call it revisionist Western just because it's a newer Western, but it's not. It's actually trying to go back to the ideals of the classic Western, real heroism, real, selflessness and whatnot. See, we need more movies like that. That's an example of a Western, but more hero films, more whatever. That's what we need. And that's what we should strive for. That's what we should try to create. And as I always say, that means stop giving your attention, even in the forms of negative reviews. Just stop giving your attention to these horrible deconstructions, these horrible movies. Stop watching the Disney Star Wars. Stop watching the Marvel. Stop watching all these horrible things, and give that attention and that energy to either creating good stories or finding good stories that are out there and promoting them. That's what we need to do. And it's a great lesson from history, because while High Noon, you're always going to have people arguing that it was a great movie, blah, blah, blah. And, in their defense, the technical aspects of it are great. It's a horrible film. It's a horrible message. It's a horrible deconstruction. And it spawned something like Rio Bravo to take place, which has just become the pinnacle of Western filmmaking. I mean, you got to watch Rio Bravo if you're at all interested in Westerns. It makes every list. High Noon does not make every list. Makes a lot of them, like I said. Beautiful, masterful filmmaking techniques and whatnot, but it doesn't make every list. Rio Bravo is 100% on every list, with good freaking reason. Really amazing film. So I've already talked way more about that than I probably should have. I can go on even more. You know me, I get on these tracks. But I just wanted to talk about that because I think it's an interesting way to learn a lesson. We can see what's happened in the past in Hollywood. We see it cycling through and happening again here today. Not that it ever really stopped, but we're just seeing the patterns. And I think we can learn from ways they fought it back then to fight it today. So I'll stop there on that topic, and we will be back in a few moments with a physical media review.